Hi everyone. Absolutely amazing listening to that talk, and I see huge parallels with what I'm going to be talking about here in Eden. So it's an absolute pleasure to be talking on behalf of the Eden community today, and in particular discussing the role that the network had in generating rapid evidence over the past year. I'm a trauma and orthopaedic surgeon by training, and I'm currently completing a PhD here in Oxford in surgical epidemiology. I won the award within the community for clinical application this year, so hopefully I'll be able to give you a flavour of what Eden is doing. Next slide. I think in the changing world we've all experienced, it's highlighted the importance of initiatives like the European Health Data and Evidence Network, which has a vision to be a trusted ecosystem for better healthcare decisions. Its core mission is to generate a federated network of data sources standardized to a common data model in order to enable these data sources to work together to produce large-scale reliable evidence. Next slide. Eden aims to do this through generating an EU-wide architecture of real-world data alongside a community of collaborators who love open science. This community is very heterogeneous, mixing those in academia and in industry alongside those in government and regulatory bodies. And this is all supported by the Eden Academy for Training. Next slide. The consortium is jointly led by Erasmus Medical Centre and Janssen, with over 22 partners, which really shows you the strength and the diversity of the group. Next slide. The beauty of the data network is shown here. As an example, there are 3 sites shown on the left that keep their data locally. They execute their analysis locally and they share their results at an aggregated level within the network. And they interact within the Eden platform to enable them to use software tools such as the Eden dashboard and Atlas software to design and develop research questions. Next slide. The common data model contains standardized clinical data alongside healthcare system data, health economic data, all within a standardized vocabulary. Next slide. And you can think of it a little bit like an electronic travel adapter for data, where the data source keeps its own form and identity, but it's able to participate within the network to generate large-scale results. Next slide. Eden is based upon privacy by design, data always remaining at source, in addition to providing frameworks for data protection in accordance with local and international codes of conduct. Next slide. There's been 3 calls for collaborators so far, and the network is continuing to grow across Europe. And I'm sure, like many others, I'm pretty excited to see who's going to be joining when the 4th call results are announced shortly. So it looks like 2021 is going to be a big year for Eden. Next slide. One of the elements of Eden that really captured my enthusiasm is that of building upon all this hard work and thorough preparation in order to develop high quality, timely evidence. And a project that was close to my surgical heart was that of the first study-a-thon that was run in Oxford, investigating the risks of complications sustained after undergoing the 2 main types of knee replacement. Over 5 days, a multidisciplinary group defined the problem, drafted the included cohorts, the study design, and generated results. The QR code given here will take you to the peer-reviewed publication in Lancet Rheumatology, and I'll also make sure that we've got the link in the chat once I finish speaking. Next slide. This efficiency and this thorough preparation came into its own in 2020. Having aimed to have an exciting face-to-face meeting in March 2020, it became very clear that this was not going to be possible due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the community moved towards thinking about what could be done instead and whether there was anything we could do to help. Next slide. The network rallied and considered 3 key areas: the characterization of those who developed COVID-19, the prediction of risk of developing it, and also drug safety studies surrounding the role of repurposed drugs that were being used at the time in the pandemic with little evidence. And this also coincided for me with returning to full-time surgical practice in the NHS as the rest of life was put on hold. Next slide. So the COVID study-a-thon was born out of original face-to-face meeting, taking over the same days, but instead going fully virtual and global, with Eden joining into the global Odyssey community. And it was a way for the network to start to address the noise from the pandemic with data on a global scale. Next slide. Anyone in the audience who took part in this will remember what an incredible process that happened, and I feel like this timeline doesn't really do justice for what we did. A group of over 350 participants in 30 countries were part of 15 concurrent channels within Microsoft Teams. And over 88 hours, we reviewed over 10,000 publications to appraise what was already known, to generate over 350 patient cohorts, while others led on developing the characterization studies of populations with COVID-19 compared to previous influenza outbreaks, to developing prediction studies for hospital and ICU admission or mortality from COVID-19, in addition to considering comparative drug studies investigating the safety of repurposed drugs. Next slide. I thought I'd give you a few results now to give you a flavour of what we achieved. I co-led the work investigating the safety of hydroxychloroquine, and that included 14 databases from 6 countries, and it was split between claims datasets and electronic healthcare records. Next slide. This brilliant infographic was designed by the co-lead author, Jamie Weaver, to show how the study was designed. We took historical data from those who had rheumatoid arthritis who were new users of hydroxychloroquine, and we compared the adverse events that they sustained compared to those taking sulfasalazine. And we also ran the combination of hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin versus hydroxychloroquine with amoxicillin, because at the time, hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin was being proposed as the main drug combination for treating COVID-19 at that stage of the pandemic. We used large-scale propensity score adjustment to adjust for observed confounding, with negative control outcomes that we generated to identify unobserved confounding that could have played a role in our results. Next slide. We looked at over 16 serious adverse events, but I've just highlighted the cardiovascular risks here as an example. And this forest plot shows the difference between those who are new users of hydroxychloroquine versus sulfasalazine. And you can see that there was no difference in cardiovascular complications seen here in the 30-day intention to treat analysis. Next slide. But if we looked at the combination of hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin, we found that there was a 2-fold increase in the risk of cardiovascular mortality within the first 30 days. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. There you go, perfect. In line with the open principles of Eden and Odyssey, the results were submitted to the medRxiv preprint server the day after the studyathon finished. And with all the protocol, the code, and the aggregated results that are available within an interactive Shiny application, which is a web-based browser, online for everyone to appraise. And the response to this was something I'd never certainly seen before. And it was something that was seen on social media and within the press. And as the pandemic took hold, it gained more attention. Next slide. I think one of the most satisfying things about being part of this was seeing the impact that the work had on emergency authorization of drugs and the change in regulatory body opinion, in part based upon the ability of them to be able to appraise the data, the study design, and the results that we had generated. And at a time where there was great uncertainty, it was great to be part of a community that was attempting to address this based upon a solid foundation of years of work and expertise in generating the federated network approach, the common data model, and the research community. Next slide. Following the first study and after the studyathon, we became aware of other regulatory concerns about hydroxychloroquine with potential psychiatric side effects that were not included in our original study. But due to the nature of the way that analytical packages are designed within Eden and Odyssey, we were able to modify our previous analytical package, generate a new protocol and approval in order to run a totally new study, but that was based upon those foundations. And luckily here, we didn't find an elevated risk of suicide, depression, or psychosis with the use of hydroxychloroquine in the users, which was reassuring. Next slide. It was quite strange being in the middle of the hydroxychloroquine study story last year, as of course it became quite a politically motivated tale. And this beautiful plot by our colleague Albert Prats-Uribe that was recently published in the BMJ shows how the data sources within Eden and Odyssey can tell the story of the use of hydroxychloroquine over the course of the pandemic. Again, the full paper is freely available here, and that's right, next slide. And you can read the fully peer-reviewed published articles about hydroxychloroquine that were possible due to the Eden Odyssey community here, and I'll post the links to the code, the protocol, the results as well for you to look at. Next slide. I think the foundations of the common data model, the privacy by design, and the interaction of the community enabled this rapid response in a changing world. My part was just a small one, but the other areas of characterization and prediction were equally remarkable. Next slide. And I think it was a great example of the power of Eden and the way it resets the way we look at observational science in a changing world. The studyathon saw an expansion of the community from those who wanted to be part of a new way of undertaking observational research. And there was rapidly available evidence that was free to appraise by all as part of an open science approach. There was regulatory change in response and peer review publication that followed and continues to emerge. Next slide. Here's where you can find out more about Eden, both from the coordinators, Professor Peter Rimbeck at Erasmus and Nigel Hughes at Janssen, and also where to find out more online. And I look forward to being part of our discussion today.